Monday, July 19th, 2021. Today on the Daily Review, we talk about the 6-part Hulu limited series entitled McCartney 321 with your host, me, Joe LaRocca, the best show on the GD Internet. What's up? I took 2 pages of notes. There's 6 episodes. They're black and white. That's why I did this. It doesn't look quite as good as they do it. I wonder if they did it because it just makes McCartney look less old. Anyway, this is Paul McCartney of the Beatles and Rick Rubin of, produced every major musician in the past 25 years. They're just chatting while listening to the soundboard mixes of Beatles and McCartney songs. The studio masters, and so they can control the stems individually. And it is a bit self-congratulatory, and it probably doesn't need to be 6 episodes. But if you're a Beatles fan, it's great because you like everything Beatles, and some of the stories you've heard before, some you haven't, but it is so awesome to hear the music in its rawest form and hear them mixing in and out different things and kind of alternative tracking that they didn't use. And just as Rick Rubin is a wonderful interviewer. He's so positive and encouraging. And so yeah, it's beautifully photographed in this black and white, plus nice archival footage and photographs, obviously. But they also do this they're in a warehouse, it feels like, and they do this ambient lighting thing where it's cars are going by and stuff. It gives it some life to the scene and some overall kinetic visuals, as opposed to just 2 old guys standing around. Also they got a circle dolly and all sorts of great stuff, so it looks great. And it is nice to hear the insight and stories from the people or the person who is actually there. But then we're also getting McCartney's version of the Beatles, which is slightly different than George's version, different than John's version, different than Ringo's version. Everybody has this kind of slightly different thing. And certainly McCartney has spent the last 2 decades making sure that it was all peace and love, baby. Really kind of Disney-fying the whole Beatles thing. But I understand it. It's good. And I get it. He after a period of time, just became a fan of the Beatles himself once he wasn't in the band, which I can understand. Yeah. So there's plenty of retread for a hardcore fan, but it's definitely worth it. So I'm just going to go through the songs that he talks about. I'm just going to go straight through them. They start with All My Lovin', and I'll stop and say things when they're something that I found interesting. All of them are interesting, but we can work it out. Michelle, my belle. Sergeant Pepper, which I didn't know that someone said, can you pass the salt and pepper? And he said, the Sergeant Pepper? I go, no, the salt and pepper. I love the story of it was released on a Friday and everybody was listening to it, and you could just walk down the street and everybody was playing different songs from Sergeant Pepper. And then Sunday night, Jimi Hendrix had a concert in San Francisco, I believe, and he covered Sergeant Pepper, the opening track. And this, it's on internet, it's on YouTube, you can see it. It's awesome. That's just so cool that within 2 days he had come up with his own version. Then right into with a little help from my friends, and kind of talking about the bass as a lead. There's a kind of a whole thread throughout this of the importance of Paul's bass playing, which again ends up feeling a bit self-congratulatory, but his bass playing is pretty unique for pop and has had a huge influence. So then they do the early George and Paul song that was never recorded back when they were kids about I'm thinking about Lincoln, thinking of Lincoln, my love to you. I'm thinking of Lincoln, something, which was based on some ad. Then they do While My Guitar Gently Weeps. They discuss that, and Clapton, stuff like that. That's the end of the first episode. And then the second episode, they talk about John's songs a little bit, and their influence of Bach and Let It Be. and they go into Eleanor Rigby, and then Penny Lane, where they talk about the piccolo trumpet, and then they isolate the piccolo trumpet, and you can hear, oh my god, it's amazing. And then Lady Madonna, it was based on this like old piano lady who was around. I can't remember her name. And it's kind of like a satire song, the way she plays. Then the most interesting part of this section, it starts talking about solo stuff with Wings, and when they were recording Band on the Run in Lagos, Nigeria, because I guess they wanted to get like, they thought they were going to get a bunch of like African musicians that have, you know, a different sound and pick up a whole African vibe, but I guess that didn't really happen. But, and maybe one of the reasons was one of the first nights he had brought all these home recorded demos for every song they were going to do, and that was going to be the template. And he was walking along the road, him and a buddy, in Lagos, and a van pulled up, and he went to get in because he thought there was somebody giving him a ride, and they jumped out with knives, and they robbed him, and in the bag was all the demos. And I think that's an awesome short film, the story of the guys who rob it and then get the demos and almost are, like, scared because it's, like, it's different than money or jewels or something. It's, like, this, it's almost priceless, you know. I love the idea, or like them listening to it and being inspired. I don't know. There's so much there. Awesome. And then they talk about Blackbird, and it's great. Yeah, great Blackbird. You know, again, all right, on to 3. Back in the USSR, Paul on drums. And they talk about like not really rehearsing anything, but basically since they had the 10,000 hours in their belt, it wasn't that big of a deal. Same thing with Babies in Black. Like they would just play these songs and or come up with them, sit around in a circle, and pretty instantaneously fill out the songs by like work, you know, knowing each other so well and knowing each other's styles. Then, and I love her. They talk about the George intro where they had the song and they're like, "What? This really isn't a song." And then George just went bow 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 bow, and they went, "Oh, there it is." And there's little things like that could spark a whole song, and that's kind of like the anchor point of that whole song. So. Then they talk about, just briefly, a double bill of the Kinks and the Beatles. And it's like, yeah, if I could go back in time, that's the show I would go to. They talk about Dylan at Abbey Hall. This is bands that influenced them that they would see at the time and that they liked. And then Jimi Hendrix at a place called Bag of Nails. They were blown away. Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds is not about LSD, although it kind of is, but we all know that story. Then they talk about, you know, burning out and getting tired of everything, going to India. And all the positives and negatives of that, Dear Prudence and meditation and stuff like that. Really the kind of key part of that episode that I took away was like, no matter what you think of the Beatles, you don't even need to like their music, or even if you think like, wow, this guy's patting himself on the back for the millionth time. Forget all that. There's so many positive things have come from the Beatles, musically, culturally, and spiritually. Because Rick Rubin said that when he became a Beatles fan, he like learned about how they got into meditation, and then he, even just as a young guy, was like, well, I guess that's the thing to do, and got into meditation. So like the influence they've had is really amazing, you know, how they've impacted people's life, not just with all their iconic music, but with like some of their ideas, you know, and those ideas, not that they originated them, but they helped popularize, you know, TM or whatever you want to call it, transcendental meditation, and even spirituality without necessarily subscribing to a church fully. Anyway, episode 4. They talk about how it's worse to be bored, and they started to get bored in the recording studio, and that's when they came to experimentation. And if they hadn't come up with all the engineers, like then they would like I don't know. At first, people were like, "That's not how you do it," but then once they had success, kind of being a bit avant-garde, the engineers were like, "Yeah, let's try it." And it's the same thing with George Martin being such a big part of the band, being like, "Well, we can do this and try this and speed this up and know all these looping techniques and recording speed techniques that are kind of the basis of so many like guitar pedal effects and recording studio effects that are used now that are just a drag and drop little plug-in. These were actually being done, physically. So the idea that if you speed something up, it also changes the frequency of the sound, meaning it'll change the note. So you got to play it, and like if you want to play a fast solo, like you actually can play it at half speed, but then you also have to figure out what note it's going to change to. So it's really pretty fascinating, and there's like math involved, or you know what I mean? And so they basically talk about that, and they go into Nowhere Man and talk about doubling up the tracks because they wanted to put the treble up really high, so you get a lot of high pitched, like, or kind of a tinny sound. And they put it up all the way, and the engineers were like, it only goes that high. And then Paul was like, well, why don't you output this into the next track and then use that set of EQs, and then output it to the next track and use that set of EQs, and then use that output. And it's like this stacking of effects, multiplying the effects, which became a popular thing to do. Paul talks about how the kind of the good thing with those older analog soundboards was that you could kind of push, like they had limitations that you could kind of mess with, and it kind of gave you a warm, crackly mistakes and stuff, and a different tonation to it all. Whereas now they're so good that you get the full range. It's the same thing that happened with switching from film to digital, is that like film is kind of limited in its latitude of light and stuff, which can be great, and you can kind of mash it more like soft clay, whereas digital is like watercolors or something. Like it's so much more delicate, and it picks up almost too much light. But we've certainly made the transition by being able to fuck with it in post, as they say. Then we go into Maxwell Silver Hammer, a song I've never really liked, but once they break it down to all the different instruments, and Bob Moog is there in the studio with the System 100 or System 500, I can't remember, and how they're making a tuba sound with the bass and all the different Moog sounds, and then Mal Evans is literally hitting an anvil with a hammer and stuff. It's like, all right, that's some Beach Boys stuff. I'm down. That's cool. Then Hard Day's Night is when they talk about that solo in half speed and then speeding up that. He goes, oh, George could play it that fast, but they wanted it perfectly accurate, so you play it at half speed. Then obviously all that home recording, tape loops, reversing, all that stuff comes in with Tomorrow Never Knows. And then the birth of Ringo. There's a lot of Birth of Ringo stuff with I Saw Her Standing There and Get Back, and how the importance that Ringo adds to the songs, and his kind of country singing voice, Another Girl, all that stuff. He didn't sing Another Girl, but and then they end with Live and Let Die, which was a Bond theme, which I had totally forgot. Obviously it was. And it's a great, right? Or no, now we're into episode 5. Oops. I skipped a little bit there. Anyway, they go into Lovely Rita. And that's really where this episode 5 is where they really talk about the importance of the bass, and basically how Stu Sutcliffe was on bass, and then he decided to stay in Hamburg because he really was a painter, and he fell in love, so he just stayed there. And so then it was like, somebody's got to be a bass player, and Paul was like, who's going to play bass? And John and George in unison went, I'm not playing the bass. And he was like, oh, now I gotta play the bass. So he didn't want to at first, but you can tell he kind of made it a lead instrument, and that's probably what made it so interesting. So This Boy, in the influence of Brian Epstein, and kind of clean up their act so they could go to the cabaret club. That song has that 3-part harmony that's so beautiful, and that was a result of needing more music that could be played at the cabaret club that wasn't pure rock, Then they do Something, and the bass in Something, which is amazing, and Taxman. So they do a couple George songs where they talk about the influence of melodic bass lines from James Jamerson, who played with Marvin Gaye, and all this stuff. And then Rick Rubin at one point goes, when they're talking about Come Together, and that it was like, it's the interaction that what makes these songs so great. Because then the very last part of that episode, they do some early McCartney stuff, like Maybe I'm Amazed, and a few other songs, and they're good. But in Maybe I'm Amazed, there's a track that was never used, and Ruben just brings the volume up, and it's this guitar going like going nuts, kind of over the top of the song, like at a certain part, and it's awesome. And it totally feels like something that would have been like the other members of the Beatles, especially John, would have been like, oh, we're keeping that. That's awesome. And there's some other kind of like funkier parts, and that it's interesting because when Paul is on his own, maybe he didn't have the confidence, or maybe he just didn't like that style. He mixed it out, you know. And it's like, oh, that would have been like much better song if you had Beatle-fied it instead of like kind of sucked that out of it. And the last episode, talk about yesterday, everything, yesterday, and ending with Day in the Life, and talk about that piano chord going on forever, which is a nice metaphor for how the Beatles have kind of resonated throughout history and time, and maybe forever, hopefully. I noticed some things. Rick Rubin is a barefoot hippie, quite literally. I mean, he looks like Fat Gandalf or something, but he also is super intelligent, and like his voice is great. He seems very heartfelt. Really good interviewer. He has a podcast called On Sound, I think, or Broken Record. Broken Record it's called, and it's the best because it's somebody who knows about music talking to people who know about music. You know what I mean? So it's not just a general interviewer. They really get into the nitty gritty. And there's one surreal kind of Duchamp, Dadaist kind of nuttiness in this totally normal documentary. Just hanging from the ceiling is a stool. And every once in a while, you can kind of just like see it in the background. And it's like, why is there a stool hanging from the ceiling? They never address it. And I know that has got to be like some Dali something, something like that. Anyway, let me see what you guys have been saying. I see a lot of chat here. Oh, hey, Timmy. Hey, Ed. Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, I had to make it black and white. The show's in black and white. If something is popular, people... Yeah, I don't know how many people really hate the Beatles. But Tim makes a good point that we're all probably guilty of, kind of becoming prickly about something that's very popular. You know what that is? It's more enjoyable when you feel like it's yours. But I think that when something gets as so big as the Beatles, where it really feels like it's everybody's, like from little babies to old, like people, like 90-year-old people can be sitting there going, Michel, ma belle, chante, plite, cante, flou, schlame, canton, schlame. And then a little kid can be going, we all live in a yellow submarine. And then a whole bunch of stone people can be going, cuckoo-ca-choo, I am the walrus. And then the frat boy singer-songwriter become, blackbird coming in the dead of night, I'm gonna put something in your drink tonight. And then, and then the grunge people can go, wow, when you get to the bottom, when you go back to the top of the slide, and then you go, and you go for a ride, and you go, and again, and I see you again. It's Helter Skelter, So they got the whole range there, and I quite like it. And I wish we could have. I mean, really, the thing I would want to have is this, but with all the Beatles and not just McCartney. That's what kind of makes you sad. Oh, the shine of my glasses looks cool in black and white. Yes, and yeah, that's cool. All right, cool. I think Rick worked with Nirvana. He did, yeah. Anyway, I guess I'll do a little bit of music. That output's coming today, so we'll get some better music. Queen's pretty damn good. Queen is pretty damn good. I would go Beatles, then I would go, like, Talking Heads. I like the Talking Heads more, but not everybody can appreciate them. I think Queen is probably more universal, for sure. What about Bowie? I guess Bowie's too, like, enigmatic and isn't really a band. Yeah. Anyway, the Beatles are like elemental in my opinion. They're just there. Maybe that's because I grew up with them. Maybe that's not true for everybody, but it seems to be the case in this documentary. Although, albeit, again, I'll say it one more time, self-congratulatory. It's fine. It's good to get it on documented, but it probably could have just been an hour and 45 minutes. I think that it actually would have been a little bit more powerful. Sorry. All right, guys. Talk to you tomorrow.